Yeah, we know.
Okay, so hi everyone. Really excited to have our first Institute for Sustainability and Resilience and Biocultural Initiative of the Pacific seminar. That really rolls off your tongue, right? The whole thing. Seminar series of spring 2026. I'm Leah. I'm the Associate Director of the Institute for Sustainability and Resilience. And ISR, our role is to kind of think about coordinating sustainability curriculum and research across campus. And one of the most exciting things that happened in the last semester is a partnership with the Biocultural Initiative of the Pacific, and they are going to be sharing some of the history and vision of the Biocultural Initiative. So I first want to introduce Kelsey Yoshi, who is a master's student in PhD. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I had my notes and then I got flustered because of the food. PhD student in NREM, who is also the GA for the Biocultural Initiative of the Pacific and does a lot of really exciting research at the intersection of linguistics. So, Kelsey, sorry.
No, it's okay. Aloha kako. Food just got here, or some of it did. So after, I guess you guys can make your plates. But I am the GA for the Bioculture Initiative of the Pacific, like you mentioned. And so I get to work with all the leadership here. And I really love that. It's interesting stuff. Amy Sato, Amy is from Canadian nurse. Amy brings together her background in biocultural conservation and Hawaiʻi lifeways as the Indigenous stewardship coordinator for Hawaiʻi nurse. And then we also have Alexander Moyer. Alex is a linguistic and cultural anthropologist interested in the nexus of language, nature, and culture around marine and coastal species, and the intersection of conservation, sustainability, sovereignty, and Indigenous agency in Oceania. He's also faculty for Pacific Island Studies. And then Gary Bolton is not with us. He is doing fieldwork in Alaska right now, I believe. But I will introduce him anyways. Gary is a documentary linguist whose work focuses on documenting, describing, and maintaining Indigenous languages and associated knowledge systems, particularly the Papuan languages of Eastern Indonesia and the Diné languages of Alaska. His research supports language vitality amid globalization while contributing to a broader understanding of the diversity of human language structures. And then also from HIMB and NERS is Kavika Winter. Kavika Winter is a biocultural ecologist who has dedicated his career to decolonizing science and conservation. He is currently an associate professor at HIMB, and in that capacity serves as a director of Hawaiʻi NERS. And we have Rachel Dax. Rachel Dax is a interdisciplinary scientist interested in how monitoring and evaluation of conservation and resource management interventions can be guided by biocultural approaches in order to reflect the well-being of the entire system. She is a professor of NREM. And then Tabar Ticton is a professor of botany. She is an ethnoecologist and conservation scientist whose research focuses on the relationships between people, plants, and ecosystem. Her work centers on Indigenous and local forest stewardship, including the harvest of wild plants, agroforestry, and biocultural conservation restoration. So the Bioculture Initiative of the Pacific also kind of underwent with visioning and remissioning. So I will also introduce our new mission statement, which is that we envision the University of Hawaiʻi and our partners as a biocultural hub that nurtures the reciprocal relationships across generations, disciplines, and regional communities. By sustaining spaces for dialogue, knowledge exchange, and collective action, we aspire to enhance resilience, well-being, and the stewardship of lands, waters, and relationships between humans and the more than human, honoring local Indigenous lifeways while shaping global leadership in biocultural approaches. Our mission, thus, is to cultivate a vibrant community of practice across Hawaiʻi and the Pacific that supports the linked well-being of people and places of care. Without further ado, I introduce the Bioculture Initiative of the Pacific leadership.
Well, so time is like an arrow that won't all forward very quickly. Our first slide just takes us into some seeding concepts and conversations for our Biocultural Initiative of the Pacific, and particularly its history. Alexander Moyer, thanks so much. On that list of Biocultural Initiative leads, there was one lead who was recently with us, Rosie Allegado, who stepped off. And before Dr. Rosie, we also had Daviana McGregor, who was with us for many, many years as part of our leadership team. I just want to give a shout out of thanks for them. As part of this first slide, we just want to flag some of the currents this initiative has been navigating. This is not a new initiative at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. The roots of our biocultural initiative reach back to the early aughts, to the early 2000s. And a couple of colleagues who at the time, Christopher Dunn at the Lions Arboretum, Ken Regg at Linguistics, Frank Stewart and others in UH Manoa's Department of English, possibly Luciano Minervi, who's with us, retired for some time. The roots reach back to some colleagues who in the early 2000s had noticed that the university silos were too strong, that despite the fact that they were easy to spot, they were hard to push against, and that many of the conversations that folks were having in different disciplines, as you well know, weren't leaving those disciplines, despite the fact that folks were engaged in comparable work. So this chaos of the disciplines kind of idea from University of Chicago, sociologist of knowledge, Andrew Abbott, this idea that the disciplines were no longer really able to meet each other to do the work that was needed. This idea that disciplines could find new ways of working with each other, to find some sort of form of consilience, this word out of E.O. Wilson. This idea that everybody by the early 2000s was engaged, found themselves, many everybody's, so there are many everybody's, that many folks found themselves engaged in the crisis of the now, right? These sort of wicked problems that are resisting singular discipline responses, that resist amelioration or remediation, problems that exceed the expertise of any of our unique or individual training. So this led the scholars I mentioned to sort of start to work together to create a new initiative, the Biocultural Initiative of the Pacific, which was first recognized by the university as early as 2009, 2010. Our initiative received permission to do some planning and was then signed into existence as an initiative by the then UH Manoa Chancellor, Robert Blave Roman. So that's over 15 years ago. And it's kind of just interesting for those who are interested in these sort of intellectual histories or scholarly histories, how fresh the biocultural can still seem, and yet for how many years it's now been rumbling along. A couple of last thoughts before we pass it on to Rachel Dax for the challenging question, what is the biocultural? For those of you who are already in the room, perhaps we are preaching to the choir, as folks say. But over the last 15 years, we did achieve a number of different kinds of things. We're at a lovely, very large event for stewards, Land, Seas, and Skies Symposium as part of the IUCN when it was here in Hawaii in 2015, 2016, bringing together stewards engaged in sky sciences, marine sciences, or terrestrial sciences, along with stewards of sky spaces, terrestrial spaces, or marine spaces. Over 450 people joined us for those gatherings over 2 days in the Orvis Auditorium. Kind of a striking thing as part of that large gathering and bringing together stewards from across the globe. We also formed up a speaker series back in the day. So for those of us who've been here for a while, this is a sort of resurgent speaker series moment for us. We're really, really delighted to bring back. And then for almost this entire run of time, we've had a biocultural seminar, which is IS 750. Some folks in the room I happen to have taken it, but some folks I happen to know in the room haven't taken it. If you're still tracking forward in your MA doctoral studies, your graduate studies, this is a course that we anticipate offering again next year. We'll return to it at the end. And without more ado, over to Rachel.
Haven't gotten food, please go help yourself to food as we continue.
All right, it's ready.
Please eat. And so in this seminar today, Alex, thank you, has given us a wonderful kind of history of what the Biocultural Initiative of the Pacific is, what it's done in the past. But a big bulk of our purpose for this presentation, the seminar today, is to really kind of examine and think about and question what is biocultural. And so I'm gonna, in the next couple of slides, I'll do my best to give you some wide-ranging definitions of the different ways that it's used, and then we'll pass it to our different speakers for them to kind of show you how they kind of embody biocultural in their work. And so there are a lot of different origin stories for where biocultural kind of came about. One of these origin stories came about in the 80s and 90s as scientists were mapping biodiversity. So they were mapping biodiversity across the globe and finding that there were what they called different biodiversity hotspots, or where there were very high numbers of species, and this pattern like held for plants, animals, vertebrates, invertebrates. And in this map, you can see biodiversity is mapped for plant diversity. So the darker the green in this map, the more species of plants. At the same time, linguists were mapping languages around the world. And when these maps were overlaid, the biodiversity maps and the linguistic diversity maps and other maps of cultural diversity of different measures of cultural diversity, a correlation was apparent. Where there were higher levels of biodiversity, there were also higher numbers of languages. And the black dots in the snap map indicate where those languages are. So where there's darker green, where there's more plant species, there's also more languages. And this pattern held for other taxa as well. And so this is kind of one of the origin stories of what's known as biocultural diversity, which the Convention on Biological Diversity defines as biological diversity and cultural diversity and the links between them. And so at its core, biocultural refers to these linkages, these relationships, these connections between the environment or biodiversity, knowledge, language, and culture. And the connections between these things are sometimes referred to as biocultural connections, biocultural relationships, biocultural links, right? But biocultural is used in many, many different other ways as well. But it's like originally perhaps used as biocultural diversity in the sense that we're discussing it today. It has other origin stories in anthropology, which we're not going to get to. And so in a review paper of biocultural concepts, this is a figure from that paper that really showed that it's in its initial mentions, biocultural was referred to as biocultural diversity. But since the early 2000s, not just has biocultural become more and more commonly discussed and studied, but the diversity of how it's being studied has also increased. So from the early 2000s, you see in the top left corner, biocultural diversity showed up, but then biocultural approaches, biocultural landscapes, biocultural proxies, and so forth started popping up in the academic literature. In another review of biocultural kind of studies and sustainability, Hans Patch and their team identified these 7 biocultural, what they call lenses in sustainability studies of how the biocultural concept has been used. I'm going to attempt to explain these, but as I attempt this, you'll notice that there's a lot of overlap amongst these and they're not necessarily distinct concepts. So I just explained biocultural diversity in the last slides. Biocultural knowledge can maybe be interchangeable with what Fikret Berkes describes as traditional ecological knowledge, sometimes called indigenous and local knowledge. But this knowledge is not just the knowledge itself, but it's a knowledge, practice, belief system that people develop over centuries or over generations and is passed down. And it's this knowledge, practice, worldviews of people and their landscapes and seascapes. And oftentimes biocultural knowledge is studied and really kind of highlighted as being essential for how people have lived sustainably in their places over many generations. And that knowledge is identified as being essential for moving forward in living sustainably in our places today as well. And so the next 2 concepts, biocultural landscapes, biocultural history and heritage, these are super linked. And these types of studies have largely been kind of spatial in nature. So spatial in nature, studying place-based communities and the relationships and that knowledge and language and culture of those places. But it's also temporal in that it refers to traditions and looking at how this knowledge and how these practices have been generated over time and how they've evolved over time as well. And oftentimes some of the studies in these kind of landscapes and history and heritage often question what it means to be pristine and if there are pristine places, because some of these areas of highest biodiversity in the world, such as in the Amazon, Australia, are places that it's because of how people lived and how they've changed those landscapes that those places have some of the highest biodiversity, levels of biodiversity. Moving on to biocultural conservation, biocultural restoration, these are very action-oriented concepts that are focused on either conserving biocultural diversity, what I explained earlier, so not just the biodiversity part, but the languages, the cultures that are all interlinked. Biocultural restoration seeks to restore those things, so seeking to restore not just the ecosystems, but the people's connections and the languages and cultures associated with those ecosystems. And then finally, biocultural ethics, rights, and sovereignty. These are justice-oriented studies or efforts that sometimes take a legal perspective, examining what are oftentimes Indigenous or local people's rights and what laws are protecting those rights. But as I mentioned, there's so much overlap amongst these, and there aren't really consistent definitions if we look across the literature, partly because the concept of biocultural and many of these terms are what are known as boundary objects, right? So scholars and non-scholars from across many different disciplines and communities are using these terms a little bit differently in different places, which could be an opportunity, right, for collaboration because we're all kind of focused on this somewhat related term, but it can be a little bit tricky and problematic too if it's not recognized that this term is being used differently. So all of those different lenses, as Hans Patch et al. Call them, these are all kind of can be considered biocultural approaches as a whole. And I kind of think that biocultural approaches, while still a boundary object, there's a little bit more consistency here. So I think in general, people agree that biocultural approaches are systems approaches. They take a whole systems lens, considering both the human populations, the ecosystems in which those human populations dwell, and all of those interactions and relationships and linkages. Biocultural approaches, I think people agree that it takes a transdisciplinary approach, so more than multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary, not just bringing together different academic departments, lenses, fields, but also bringing in non-scholar knowledge and perspectives. And that's what makes it transdisciplinary, but also because of that transdisciplinariness of it, biocultural approaches tend to embrace multiple knowledge systems, and those aren't just academic disciplinary knowledge systems, but also place-based knowledge systems of communities. And then I think most people would agree also that biocultural approaches are sustainability focused because they're studying or working with these different knowledge systems and places and communities that have managed to sustain themselves over time, and they have sustainability in their visions for moving forward. Where things get a little bit more fuzzy on whether the next couple of points are biocultural approaches or not, I think there are these questions that are ongoing in the field. So do biocultural approaches have to be place-based? I kind of think so. Do they have to be working with Indigenous cultures or Indigenous communities, or can biocultural approaches be working with place or local communities that perhaps aren't Indigenous to that place? Or can biocultural approaches be with any communities living anywhere? Some questions still lingering there. Do biocultural approaches only focus on native species? Can biocultural approaches also address questions that have to do with people and invasives or non-native species, or canoe plants, for example, here in Hawaii, right, that aren't necessarily native? And then a final question kind of in these biocultural approaches that I think everyone's still kind of asking themselves, or people might have their own answers, but may not have the same answers to others who are using biocultural approaches, is who leads these efforts? Do biocultural approaches have to be led by place-based communities? Do they have to be led by Indigenous communities? Can an academic university scientist lead a biocultural project? If they can, I would assume that most people would say, well, it has to be co-produced then, but we know that co-production can be at many different levels. So what level of co-production has to be happening for something to be considered biocultural? So these are where some questions still remain. And so for the next couple slides, we'll pass around to the different biocultural initiative leaders to kind of help you better understand what biocultural means to us by showing you what we work on in this realm. And so I'll start us off. In my introduction, you heard that I work on different ways to monitor and evaluate conservation, natural resource management, perhaps sustainable development in a way that more holistically takes the well-being of the entire system into account. And so some of us in the room here worked on a project to understand what the well-being of the entire system looks like to place-based communities around the Pacific. And we asked lots of practitioners and community members from around the region, what does well-being look like in your place? What does resilience look like in your place? What does success? How do you know a project's been successful? And we asked that in many different ways. And we heard many different things that were kind of summarized in the Pacific Islands Wellbeing Dimensions framework. And we know that in many of these dimensions, such as human health or environmental state, there are lots of indicators that are being used to assess whether a project is successful or is working or not. But in other of these dimensions, including connectedness to people and place, as well as Indigenous and local knowledge, skills, practice, values, and worldviews, there aren't that many indicators that are being used that could be categorized in those categories to measure the success of projects or efforts. And so we've used this framework to develop indicators to try to take a biocultural approach to monitoring and evaluation. One way we've done this has been with communities in Fiji who have focused a lot of efforts over many years on community-based fisheries management. And many of their partner organizations, which might be NGOs or the local university or government, has largely focused on important indicators such as fish biomass or coral reef cover to measure success. And I say those are important because they do represent part of the system, but they're not really holistic because they don't indicate anything about what that project is doing for the people of that place. And so one approach we've taken to do this is to understand how fish are shared in sharing networks, because people have indicated that one reason why fish are important in communities and why people want to manage them is not just for household level food security, but being able to maintain and build connections with other households and other communities. So we've taken a social network approach to that. In other surveys and interviews, we've asked questions, again, that align with the framework that I discussed in the last slide to understand, for example, what names people are using to refer to these different fish. Is that changing over time, or how are people losing some of the words or these names of the fish? Are certain fish kind of being called the same name? What are people's knowledges associated with some of the life history traits of this fish? And also, like, what are people's perceptions of this knowledge? Is it important? And we've asked that over different generations to kind of get a sense for that. Closer to home here in Hawaii, thinking about biocultural restoration, we've tried to kind of pilot some methods for monitoring biocultural restoration that takes into account the larger holistic system. So kind of conventional restoration has used measures like number of trees planted or acres restored or invasive species removed, which are important measures, not saying that those are not important, but it misses the human. It misses those biocultural connections between people and place, right? So how can we monitor or evaluate biocultural restoration in a way that we're actually understanding, are these efforts restoring people's connection to place? And so in some interviews and surveys we've done, we've heard that volunteers of biocultural restoration projects, they show up, they come to these events for reasons such as these events are important for maintaining or building social connections, for building sense of place, sense of purpose, and that these opportunities have real impacts on people's physical and mental health. So those are just a little couple of ways that I kind of use this biocultural concept. I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Tamara Tignan.
Pause an opportunity to get
Please go get food. Yeah, so again, we're gonna now rotate around and each just give one example of how we engage with the biocultural and our different kinds of work, because we all come from pretty different backgrounds. So I was thinking about what to choose, and I decided I wanted to share this project, which is about building what I'm gonna call biocultural abundance of hala. For any of you who don't know, hala is this beautiful tree right over here. From the very start, from the development of our proposal to now, our project is guided by two master weavers, Kumumaile Andrade and Hauʻoli Wickman. And our research is carried out by our two super awesome graduate students, Tahina Kahikina, who is in Hawaiian Studies, and Makana Maikalani Larger, who is in Botany. And there's a series of us mentors and collaborators who are helping out on this project. Hala is really an amazing plant because, for many reasons, but also because hala sits at the interface and fosters a diversity of biocultural relationships and biocultural connections. Okay, so hala connects people to plants through the art of weaving the leaves, the lau, right? Through other kinds of uses for medicine, food, for perfuming, but also through non-tangible ways, like through the ike or the knowledge associated with these practices. Hala connects people to place through the act of gathering, through the act of tending the plants. And in other ways, especially hala is often highlighted in mele, so connecting people to specific groves. Hala connects people to each other through the collective act of weaving, for example, and through the gifting of products made from hala. Hala connects people to the past, people to ancestors, through the transmission of knowledge, ike over generations, but also through the transmission of, again, products made from hala, papale, or mats that are passed down in families through generations. Hala actually connects people across islands. Right? So the pe'ar, the sails of the voyaging canoes, were made from the leaves of hala, and hala, the pe'ar are still being woven today for the va'av today. And hala connects people across islands as well. The kumu travel across islands, sharing their art, sharing their knowledge, exchanging about weaving and other practices. Hala connects plants and animals in many ways. The hala trees are roosts for the pu'eo and the opeapea, the owl and the Hawaiian bat. Hala hosts lots of plants as well. Hala supports epiphytes, mosses, ferns growing on hala. And I want to say hala also supports Mauka-Makai relationships, healthy Mauka-Makai relationships, because hala prevents, the hala that are growing along the coast prevent soil from running off and runoff going into the ocean, and in the other direction, prevent the salt spray from coming over onto the plants. And I wanted to share a quote that I came across in actually reading Hanaho magazine. It was about sort of resurgence of hala weaving. And they had a wonderful quote from master weaver, Auntie Gladys Grace. And it's recounted by her haumana, her student, Auntie Lorna May, when she went to her first class with Auntie Gladys. And she said that Auntie Gladys said, "I'm not just going to teach you how to take these leaves and weave them, but I'm also going to teach you how to weave relationships and how to weave the past and the present." So I think that really encompasses some of this biocultural. The issue that our project deals with is that a lot of these amazing rich biocultural connections and interrelationships, like for many species, are under a lot of pressure now. So many of the historical hala groves have been, over the past 200 years, have been destroyed. Pineapple plantations, sugar plantation, golf courses, and so on. Those that are remaining are facing a lot of threats for regeneration from invasive plants that have come in and prevented regeneration. Those that remained along the coast and other places, often there's no access for people to get to them or to tend to them. Since the 1990s, we've had the hala scale, which is on 3 islands now, and actually makes the leaves unusable for hala weavers. So it's a really big issue. So our project is about how can we increase the abundance of hala populations to be able to foster all these rich relationships that they support? And so we've got a number of components. So Tahina is asking, where were the historical, these historical, I'm looking for another word here that I wanted to say, but anyway, where were the historical, ancestral, like beloved large groves And she's using Olelo Hawaiʻi archival research, mele, ole photographs to try to get at where they were and how they were cared for and loved. Tehina and Makana are doing interviews with Lauhala practitioners to understand the relationships to hala, how hala is tended, which tending practices and environmental conditions foster high quality leaves or lau and healthy trees. We're also trying to look at the conservation status of hala across the islands. What ecological conditions foster hala regeneration in today's context of so many invasive species and other threats in our forests? And then pulling this all together with the restoration experiment that Makana is carrying out, we're trying to understand how and where can we best restore hala populations to be able to help them support all those connections and interrelations. And that was the project I was going to share, and I'll pass it on to Amy.
Aloha, everyone. Again, my name is Amy Sato. Kelsey did a brilliant introduction, so I'll just say that I was raised on Kauai, and I am super lucky now to be able to live and work in the Ahupua'a of He'eia, where me and Kavika work in with the He'eia National Estuarine Research Reserve. If you folks aren't familiar, you probably have heard of the He'eia Fish Pond with Paipai'o He'eia. We are located in Kaneohe Bay. So we specifically work on Moku'olo'e, sometimes known as Coconut Island. It's a little islet right in the middle of like He'eia Fish Pond. If you're looking towards Mokapu, that little island with a bunch of coconuts on it. And I wanted to talk a story about this project that for now we're just calling a hale new, but how many people have seen a hale before? Okay, that's pretty good. Okay, so if you haven't, this is kind of one example of something you can visualize from Makena on Maui. So I just want to do like quick storytelling here because I love storytelling, and if you can just kind of picture this before I get into some of the bullets. But think of an invasive landscape. Shouldn't be too hard, unfortunately, right? In Hawaii. I'm gonna base us ground us in He'eia, but bear in mind, I'm gonna put a little bit of story in here. So fill in a little bit of puka as in holes here. But if you can picture us at the fish pond, right? It's before all the mangroves were removed, the invasive mangroves. And there's a community there, there's a grassroots organization there that has, and some other people, like we were saying, multiple knowledge systems, right? Maybe there's some researchers, local and indigenous people, and they see the mangrove and they kilo and study this place and have this relationship with this place enough to start to learn the biocultural knowledge of mangroves even, right? This invasive species. So they know enough biologically, ecologically, that it's not good for the system. So they start cutting it, right? And they also know enough of the cultural information, or they have worked with this mangrove enough to know that it's a dense wood. And the places that the mangrove comes from are used for building material. So they start cutting it, and then they realize, you know what, we're making hale all the time. So we're gonna use this as some of the main posts because it's like really sturdy wood. So they start building hale, these structures using the mangrove, right? Okay, what else do you need for a hale? You also need the sticks that go across that you're gonna lash your roof on. And these are like skinnier sticks, not too big of a mangrove. We don't really have the native wood because it's, even Mauka upland is all invasive. So we're gonna trek on over across the street to some of the upland folks, and we find things like inkberry, or maybe we even find like vivy or strawberry guava, and we see that it's skinny, it's pretty sturdy wood too. Okay, we're gonna start cutting that. And as we cut the mangrove, as we cut the inkberry, we're also clearing and then outplanting some of the native and cultural plants that we would normally build with hale, right? Okay, now we need stuff to lash, because if we don't have, if it's just sticks, then when it rains, it's gonna fall on us, right? Maybe we're gonna try to make a lolu, fan palm, native fan palm hale, right? oh, no more Lolu either. But there are these non-native Lolu or non-native fan ponds. Still works, so we're gonna start using that, right? And then we're also gonna start planting and creating a Lolu farm so that in a few decades we can use Lolu. So if you picture this, right, and then it's not like a bulldozing image, but if you kind of high speed this vision, right, this imagery of kind of removing the invasive species, the mangrove is starting to like disappear, and your all the native recruitment is coming. Sometimes you're outplanting, and this visual of this aina kind of transforming, and maybe the things that we build, hales and things, aren't using the native things, but we're using that practice, right? And we're at this beautiful place in He'eia Nur right now, where Paipai o He'eia, who used to take mangroves from the He'eia fish pond, is now doesn't have big mangroves. So they're coming to Mokolo'e to grab mangroves from us. And we're at the beautiful place where we're ready to build a hale. So we're gonna be working with Paipai o He'eia, Keahi, who's gonna help elevate some of the Native Hawaiian expertise in building this structure on Mokolo'e. When we think about what is bioculture, right, it's thinking about people's relationship with place and the more than human, the things that have not just 2 feet, but it's the plant people, the aina people, right? So we're elevating indigenous knowledge, we're reutilizing invasive wood. We're also going to be taking care, and we're going to be taking care of the new. We're going to specifically, hopefully, have thatching with the coconut, the new, because we're a coconut island and we have a lot of pilina to that space. We're also being all up in the trees, and we're going to be harvesting and lashing. So we're building pilina, just like this photo of people lashing with that material, right? But we're also going to be up in the trees so that we can monitor for coconut rhinoceros beetle. So from a far point, if you're not really familiar, maybe the hale doesn't look super biocultural, but if you look really carefully, it can be a huge biocultural indicator, like Rachel was saying, right? If you see a hale pili or a hale new or hale with lolu, native lolu, it tells us that all of this system is working. Yeah, I'm gonna move to the next one. Mahalo. Kaviga, perfect.
Okay, aloha mai kako. The people in the room, people across campus on Zoom, and friends, at least one friend from across the Pacific in Tahiti. Aloha mai kako. So biocultural restoration is kind of my thing. I don't need to define that. Rachel did a good job of helping introduce that. But there, at least in Hawaii, there have been a lot of obstacles on our path for those of us who have been trying to engage in a form of conservation that some of us think of as biocultural restoration. That means, using Hawaiian practices, values, strategies to make sure that our landscapes are still okay moving forward in the future, when sometimes, quite often in closed door spaces. And this is happening less today than it was a few decades ago, but definitely has been said, why should we involve the Hawaiians? Are the ones who deforested the landscape in the first place, or they're the ones who caused extinctions in the first place. So why would we ever bring their ways of doing it into these conservation spaces? So these are some of the common myths that we have heard. At least I've heard my whole life. Hawaiians cause deforestation. Between the deforestation and the overhunting, Hawaiians cause the extinction of flightless land birds, and Hawaiians cause the extinction of forest birds in the pursuit of feathers. So let's take a look at these. A lot of these myths source to these 2 publications, both of which came out in 1982. Fossil Birds of the Hawaiian Islands, Evidence for Wholesale Extinction by Hawaiians. Science, 1982. And then Pacific Science, UH's own publication, Impact of Prehistoric Polynesians on the Hawaiian Ecosystem. So each one of these publications then had other publications building on top of it, citing these. And that's where these myths, at least from what I can tell. But I think most of us in this room are scientists. There's a difference between correlation and causation, right? So before I get into that, just want to point out, so these are archaeologists publishing, saying, kind of looking at layers and noticing that there's layers where there's no birds, well, layers where there's birds, and then layers where there's no birds, and then at some point people show up. And so based on a correlation that they're seeing in their archaeological data, they're saying that Hawaiians caused extinction of these things, right? Hawaiians caused deforestation, but Nicolas Cage obviously didn't cause pool drownings. So there is, we need to be really careful as scholars if we're being responsible in how we look at the data, how we interpret the data, how we make our conclusions. We need to kind of keep our own worldviews in check as we're doing this. But recently published, this came out last month, paper we published, Kristen Harmon, former graduate student of Melissa Price. I was on her committee. We really wanted to look more deeply at this. This really stems from, we had another chapter of her PhD dissertation we're trying to publish, and it got rejected. And the paper was basically, it was an effort to model lo'i systems and kind of say, based on this modeling, if we restored all the lo'i in Hawaii, it could be really help contribute to the recovery of these endangered water birds. We eventually published it, but the first journal we tried rejected us. And that rejection kind of sourced to one of the peer reviewers who basically said, can't remember the exact wording, but it was basically something like, it's common knowledge that Hawaiians hunted these water birds to extinction. So the idea that Hawaiian practices could contribute to the recovery is absolutely ridiculous. This paper should not be published. The editor agreed and they rejected us. So then our graduate student Kristen was thinking, where does this come from? And this kind of idea of Hawaiians causing bird extinctions kept coming up. And so we said, okay, you know what, go look at it. Go look at the evidence, because I've heard this also my whole life and I have never seen any evidence, but people say this all the time. So why are people saying this? So you go look at it. So she did the deep dive into the literature and found that there's no evidence of hunting. There's no evidence of hunting. There's no burnt bird bones, or at least no cut bones, no bird bones in middens. There was actually one bird bone in a midden, and it was a nene. We still have nene. So what that tells us, at least through my interpretation, is that once our ancestors can eat something, then they figure out how to make sure it's around forever, as evidence with our nene. So anyway, what the deep dive revealed is that the majority of these birds went extinct way before anybody showed up. There were some extinctions after the first human arrivals, and then more extinctions after subsequent waves of humans showing up. So if it's not people that are killing these things or causing extinctions, what else is causing them? There have been these other hypotheses. So kind of this one, trying to remember what my next slide is. Sorry. So one of them is the overkill hypothesis, which is kind of what informed those earlier papers, those 1982 papers. Obviously, if birds are going extinct before people are showing up, it's not an overkill issue. Other people have talked about climate change. Yes, maybe there's some issues with that. Other people have talked about species introductions and deforestation. So each one of these single hypotheses, what we talk about in this paper, each one of these single hypotheses does not explain what's happened. So we postulated a new hypothesis, called it the regime shift extinctions hypothesis. If there are any ecologists in the room, you don't know what this term is. If you're not an ecologist, basically a regime shift in ecology is the same as in politics. When you change the most dominant elements of the system, the whole system changes and looks different after that. So ecologically, when there's a regime shift, you change out the dominance, you're gonna have a whole different system after that, and there's gonna be some cascading extinctions that happen in that process. And so that's happened throughout time. We've tracked these regime shifts, changes in rain patterns mostly, but how they impacted the plant diversity and what was dominant on the landscape. In the first dry period, Hawaii was dominated by grasslands and then dominated by forest, and then forest changes through time. And anyway, so our theory is, our new hypothesis is that it's these regime shifts that have caused extinction. So anyway, I don't want to spend too much time on that. But now that we have taken these barriers down, then this old kind of I don't know what to describe it, but this kind of dialogue or this idea in conservation that we shouldn't look to the Hawaiian way of doing things because they're the ones cause all the problems. Well, if that's actually not true, then what that tells us is that maybe the best way, if you want to have humans and nature and biodiversity thriving together in a single system, then maybe indigenous stewardship is something that we can use to move forward. I think this is my last slide. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Oh gosh, that's an impossible act to follow, because now my head is full of fear of the next time Nicolas Cage makes a movie, do I have to avoid a swimming pool for the following months? I've had the privilege of standing in for someone else. We have a colleague who's not with us today, Dr. Gary Holton from UH Manoa's linguistics department, and unfortunately I can't do Gary or be Gary. He's remarkable and presenting in just a few weeks. So if you're looking forward to a chance to engage with one of the foundations of our biocultural initiative from the dawn age to the present. So as you might have caught in Rachel's opening up of the space, the biocultural approach constellation emerged or rose over the horizon of science at some point in the 90s and early 2000s at the intersection of scholars, often in linguistics or in biodiversity or conservation sciences. UH Manoa happens to have, and maybe some of you are already engaged in this department space, but if you're not, we happen to have one of the world's most recognized departments for language documentation and conservation, the kinds of linguists who do the kind of work that is fundamentally biocultural, which is to say, the kind of work that brings into visibility, hence potential legibility to non-linguists, indigenous ecological knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge, traditional species knowledge that's language encoded, or other kinds of ideas about human-nature relations or human-place relations or human-place entanglements that have their ontology in language, that have their being in language. So some of the kind of work that Gary will be presenting on in a few weeks, next month?
2 weeks.
In 2 weeks, as part of this speaker series, so please return, is in this biocultural space, and he represents and anchors a really remarkable sea of projects upstairs in Moore Hall in linguistics. So the key foundational ideas here that are worth thinking about, perhaps you've bumped into one of them before, is that language may be a vehicle for thought, that the language that you speak, that your L1 or first language, that the language that you grew up with and learned as a young person may play such a strong role in the shaping of your cognition that you perceive, conceive, experience, and respond to the world in a patterned way in the basis of the language that you acquired at the time of your youth. And that when you learn a second or a third language, and many of you may be multilingual, then one of the things that you may discover that you bumped into along the way is that you were being offered other ways of being human in the world, right? So that's a famous old idea called the Worth-Sapir hypothesis, much debated across the social sciences and linguistics, but increasingly studied by linguists as their contribution to biocultural framework. So Gary's example here from research community he's worked in Indonesia, his research is in the North Pacific, in Indonesia, including Papua, and in Alaska. So he's a very, very experienced field researcher. But here in Indonesian island Pantar, Gary gives us examples of distinct ideas about water, right? So this is a really easy one as English speakers. How many kinds of water do we have? One. There's just one. The word water. And if you want to mess with the word water, you got to add something to it. Salt water, bitter water, sweet water, fire water, sky water, whatever you like. So you can come with lots of adjectives for water, but there's one conceptual idea for water. How many kinds of waters are there for any Eastern Polynesian language? For those who have Olelo or Reotiti or another Polynesian language, for instance. There's two, Tai and Vai, right? There's not one concept of water. There's two fundamental ontologically distinct waters, and they are distinct in every possible way. And linguists do this kind of work regularly. Here's an example of how some ideas about water are coded in Pantar, again, in even more plural context. So it's a really, really fantastic dimension of biocultural work, is providing scholars in other fields, the conservation and sustainability sciences broadly, or ecology and biology broadly, with access to things that are not typically part of their training, like, is nature universal? And there's just one nature that we're all going to uncover together? Or is nature plural? And one of the goals of biocultural work is to open up that kaleidoscopic plurality of the real, because the real is not is not easily accessible to us directly. Doesn't present itself just ready to hand. Anyway, that's Gary's work, and I'm really hope you'll join in 2 weeks for our next. Is that the very next?
It's February 25th.
And we'll be presenting on the linguistics of bananas.
The linguistics of bananas. So now I'll turn to myself. Just looking at the slides, like our other colleagues, I've got a number of active projects. Here's one that I'm in the NSF final reporting phase, and they are waiting right now for my final reports. It's a Belmont Forum project called Polycone, Integrated and Sustainable Regulation of Cones in Eastern Polynesia. This project was centered at the Rahui Center. We have Oriana from the Rahui Center with us online, and the lead PI of this project was Dr. Tambatoa Bambridge at the CNRS and the Creoban, sort of the director of the Rahui Center, founder. This project sought to bring into view and make, again, legible and visible a kind of incredible animal, cone snails. They're around us. They surround, like the force, they surround us. They're everywhere. But they're unseen in our waters from the surface. And like many marine species, they are underregulated, undermanaged, underthunk upon, and problematically so. So this project included chemists, geneticists, ecologists, biologists, marine biologists, and so on. But it also included attorneys, anthropologists, sociologists, political scientists doing work in local communities, some of which occurred at a biocultural intersection, which is say human cone relationships or human mollusk relationships. We don't think of mollusks as being terribly cuddly often, except for perhaps that movie, The Octopus Teacher, or My Octopus Teacher. But many mollusks indeed have complex relations to communities of various kinds, which maybe makes visible some of the, I should grab my water. Some of the, which we can make visible, some of those relations, specifically in the case of French Polynesia, marine cones turn out to have a wide variety of human entanglements, including here in the bottom left was a atelier or workshop for traditional practitioners of local medicines, Rautīti, quite broadly. So some marine species, like cones, hard to say for any given practitioner whether cones play a role. Here are some of these incredible creatures, or not in the Ra'au. But marine species like cone snails can show up in traditional medical practices. They obviously have potential incredible symbolic values of a wide variety of kinds. They show up in museums. They can be entangled in archaeological records. Cone snails may have relationships to local communities across French Polynesia, including the Marquesas, where some of these photos were taken, in other more exquisite ways. So for instance, one of the things we documented with one of my doctoral students, Valentin Raymond, who I co-direct with Kemi Maze and at Paris Sciences Po. When Val and I were in the Marquesas for field research, we bumped into the way in which when cone snails are washed up after a big storm, the presence of those snails on the beaches, for certain beaches, anchors a memory of when that storm was and how big that storm was, right? The presence of the snails is playing a role in memory, and memories that actually create a kind of sense of historic time. When were the big storms? Which storms really mattered? Sometimes the storms that really mattered are the ones that were big enough to throw certain mollusks up on the shore. And it was the presence of the mollusk as an indicator that helps anchor the significance of that storm in memory. That might have gone with other things like loss of power, food insecurity, the need to rebuild, replant the trees that were lost, and other kinds of things. So for this Polycone project, perhaps the most intriguing thing for me to flag before we go to that last slide and turn it back to Amy, to Tamara, maybe just wrapping up this kind of project, one of the most interesting things for me as a sort of linguistic and cultural anthropologist working in a transdisciplinary project and trying to bring a biocultural lens to a space that had chemists, geneticists, ecologists, marine biologists, and so on, is that you bump into those silos as epistemic and ontological barriers or boundaries between different disciplines. I think this is one of the great utilities of biocultural frameworks, is that they don't put us all in the same space exactly, but they create a space in which we can try to find each other for the kinds of things that are really hard to discuss. For instance, the illegibility of non-charismatic species to governance. Right, that something like a cone snail which may have, in theory, protections under Nagoya or CITES or the CBD or so on, is nevertheless underprotected under local laws and management of lagoons. It's not a big charismatic fish or a coral reef, right? Or that some kinds of entities in nature may be literally ontologically invisible, like the things that have cultural or spiritual value or relationalities, which I've not talked about in this space for cone snails, but which is certainly true for cone snails in some places in the Pacific. Or that scientists doing conservation and sustainability work need to think perhaps more, and it's again probably preaching to the choir for this room to reuse a phrase I used earlier, to think more about local rights over making decisions about the futures of species in local lagoons. Right, a very serious biocultural space that for our chemists or geneticists working on really neat marine science may not always be the first thing they get to or something that they ever get to, unless there's a kind of biocultural transdisciplinary space that produces a conversation. So, I think in conversation with all of our colleagues, one of the things we hope that you pull away out of this gathering is that this biocultural initiative is certainly urging us towards a reflective, multidisciplinary, ontologically plural, epistemically open and engaging conversation across whatever training you're doing in your different doctoral or MA programs. And now we'll turn it to Tamara for our last slide.
I don't know, Alex, I think you could do the last slide a lot better. Yeah, so we're going to wrap up now. We know it's close to an hour, but we just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of sort of the diversity of ways in which we engage in the biocultural, but also to make clear that there's a whole bunch of other faculty involved in our initiative and students, and we want to have more and more people involved. So that's one of the reasons we're doing this seminar and starting off here to welcome everybody in. So what we wanted to end up today on was just some of the things that we have been doing this past semester. Alex talked about our class that we teach, IS 750. We taught it again this fall. All 6 of us with Gary taught it. And Alex, you can repeat all those words you just said about the diversity of whatever Alex was talking about, breaking down all the silos and bringing people together. That's a big goal of our class. We had 24 graduate students from, I don't know how many departments, 7, 8, many different colleges, but a big goal of ours was to bring people together with different ways of thinking, try to break down those silos and learn from each other and think together about what biocultural is. And so we did that. We are starting the seminar series. Kelsey's going to talk about the launch of our Biocultural Student Club. We also have a donation from Kamehameha Schools from a number of years ago for community engagement grants for students. So students who are doing any kind of biocultural work, we have grants that will allow them to engage with communities, whether before their projects, to co-produce, during them, after, sharing in whatever ways. These are often really hard to get that kind of money from grants. And so that was one of the reasons that we wanted to do this. So we're going to be launching our call, I think probably this month or next month, for people to be able to work over the summer. We have Rachel, Amy, and Alex who are editing a book about biocultural stories called Ancestors of Tomorrow. And we are working towards building capacity for biocultural stewardship research across Hawaii and the Pacific. We are trying to focus on building opportunities through funding, through mentoring, through other kinds of support for Indigenous students from Hawaii and across the Pacific working in their homes. And we have some funding to be able to do that, starting with the International Society for Ethnobiology Conference in 2026 in the summer. We're going to have a bunch of events around that before and after. So these are just some of the things that we have going. We are open to many more ideas. We welcome everybody to join us. And with that, I will turn it over to Kelsey.
Okay, so also as part of my GA-ship duties, I am launching soft launching a bioculture initiative student club. Right now we have about 12 people on there. So, and actually it's open to not just students. It's also open to staff, faculty, the broader community. As part of the student club, we are hosting workdays and workshops and seminars. So we have monthly workdays for now. And
also monthly like workshops. So next month, we have a hale building workshop at Honolulu Community College on the 13th. You can see that on the events calendar. It's like a Google Sheet separated by month. But if you prefer a Google Calendar format, you can also add it using that link. And then we'll be going to Waimanalo Limuhui. In April, we will be doing a campus arboretum tour with Noveo Kai, and then going to Kako'oiwi. And then in May, because that is graduation time, we will be lei making together and having like a pauhana. And then we'll be doing one more workday that I can't remember, but it's on the calendar. And also seminars are part of that. So you'll be receiving emails from me if you sign up. If you don't sign up, the emails might not go out to you. But yeah, any questions or anything else I should mention?
Yeah, well, we'll turn it, I think we'll maybe take questions all together. I just want to maybe end this by also reminding everybody about our upcoming speakers. So we already talked about Gary Holton, who's going to come. We also have Ron Bave from Pacific Island Studies, who's going to present. Kapika Winter here from Hei'a Nur. What else we have? Nakoa Braun, of course, who will be coming, thank you, who will, from School of Life Sciences, and we'll probably have one more as well. So just for you to stay tuned.
Every other week.
Every other week. Yeah, all of whom are members of our initiative. And again, we're hoping to reach out to bring more people in, open to ideas, and we'd like to open up to any questions right now from the audience for any of us.
Ask your questions. Please eat food, and just a thank you to the ISR team that brought them.
Any online questions?
People just need a second. A lot of awesome.
When we taught our class this past fall, we spent the whole semester talking about biocultural, but we got a comment from our students that we never actually defined what it was. And so hence Rachel has made that effort. That's great.
I guess I have a question about the class. What is that like? What does the general class structure look like? I haven't heard about it before now.
Alex, you want to talk about it?
Oh gosh, that class has been we've been teaching for a long time, and a remarkable thing that at this point we've literally had like 10 cohorts of students. This year was the biggest year ever with literally 24 graduate students, which might have been too many, but I think it was a super successful class. And the organization is basically around a series of different topics that flesh out that explore that land seascape of the biocultural. So everything from the foundational idea of what is the biocultural to biodiversity laws, conservation and sovereignty, traditional ecological knowledge, indigenous ecological knowledge, ancestral knowledge, like exploring knowledge systems, or really we try to treat each of those weeks as a chance to explore one of the facets of that hyper object of what is the biocultural. And then beyond that, each individual session, we've really tried to focus on a really depthful reading of literature. So sort of the other aspect is kind of like, biocultural book club for graduate students and faculty, right? So we're reading really closely and trying to unpack the current literature. So one of our secret goals for that class is, it's not a pitch for Leo DiCaprio, who doesn't need any extra pitches, but it is to like incept students to think about how they could incorporate biocultural frameworks into their doctoral and master's degree work. Right, so it is one of those classes that has the sort of secret inception kind of model. Like, could biocultural frameworks be useful for your PhD? Yes. Right, so and we what's really remarkable is we've seen students publish papers out of this class, which is always great for graduate students, and or chapters in their doctoral work that were really engaged and improved.
And I would just maybe add that one thing that we try to do is with each class, try to have some kind of hands-on exercise that puts people from different disciplines together in a group to brainstorm about something. So,
Cool, thank you.
So I'm actually now not sure how I got on this email list, but these are all things that interest me, and I'm glad I'm here and I learned a lot. Thinking a little bit like like how this relates to academia and like introducing students to what you offer here. While I'm getting a lot of good information. And like the student club, thank you for saying anyone can go. I feel a little bit awkward going into things with a lot of students, but these are all things that I'm into, like reforestation, like those are things that I want to learn more about. And not only that, but like the more I look into it, the more there are so many organizations that are in this, in Hawaii. And so like getting to connect to the different organizations. So for the potential for us to rally and like work on the projects where we connect. So I guess my question is, in the upcoming lecture series, like, is this meant for the community or like, what is the, I guess the goal of the lecture series, which is every 2 weeks?
I think absolutely, we'd like to have it as open as possible. As ISR, you try to invite.
Yeah,
Wanna answer
everybody's, I mean, the broader Institute for Sustainability and Resilience seminar series is absolutely open to anyone at the university and beyond who are interested in these kinds of topics. And I think it's true for Biocultural Initiative as well. Yeah.
And absolutely, it's a big interest of ours, as Alex talked about. One of our big events was really specifically geared towards bringing community here together with folks in academia to have conversations. So yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, just opportunities for people to be together and talk about some of the issues and
So I really thank you so much for that question. Like I think this emphasized we try to make today, like we're all in different colleges. We have different deans, we have different funding structures, we have different things that we're doing. But here's the thing that brings us all together regularly and brings our students together regularly now. And I think we're knocking those sort of walls down between us. This University of Hawaii could probably do better to reach out to the community across many different topics. So here's a space that should definitely be community open and Walina Mai. Yeah.
that's a good question. Does anybody else have a question? Anybody online have a question? Okay, so
I have a comment. I never have questions. This beginning discussion of the definitions is very legitimate in academia, but our local community have problems that are not disciplinary. They have a problem aspiration. They need that these issues be addressed. So maybe the university has to try to connect more with the community, not just within students, university community through a course. So the problematic is much bigger, gigantic. Okay, you do a piece of it. But think what happened to University of Hawaii at Manoa. We got flooded. We lost all the government documents. We lost all the maps. I donated 200 maps to them. They're all gone. And we are the collection of the top expertise in the state of Hawaii, right here in this campus. And it's not fault of the students, but of the institution. Our departments, our colleges, our administration has been unable, with all the expertise in engineering, architecture, planning, administration, law, and so on, to save the library. And so the question is that you can explore at the seminar. Why this is happening? How it is possible that with all this expertise, that we claim we can work in the Asia and the Pacific, we cannot take care of our library. So I would explore this problematic and I would have some idea. Then I have another one that really blow up my mind. What happened on Maui in Lahaina is incredible. And then we find out that there was some good professor in the College of Tropical Agriculture with some nice little local community NGO that did studies well before the disaster that say that the locality were in danger. So they had maps and they evidently, they gave that report to whoever, I don't know, government agency, legislation, and so on. And what happened? More than 100 people died. Don't we have to think that perhaps the university could have done better in doing something? I have some suggestions if you want to hear. Suppose that good professor with that good little tiny NGOs with very little money, by authority and regulation of the university, would have given their report that was kind of forestry expertise and so on, to the College of Social Science, Department of Urban and Regional Planning, to the College of Social Science, Public Administration, to the law school, having their disciplinary technical report on danger because of a fire, to these different departments and other engineers and so on. You guys too, of course. I think that that report would have obtained additional disciplinary input from this different expertise, and then the university sent it to the legislature and the executive branch of the state. Maybe the university would have had very strong power to present a disciplinary report with an interdisciplinary review.
That's a great point.
I'm crazy, I'm making things up.
No, I think
No, because you might be old enough to remember. He's still young. No. We had it. It was the environmental center. Meeting because I have to say something important.
there is.
It was the environmental center. Every report done in the state had to go to the environmental center for review. The environmental center was sending requests to different departments to comment on the plan, and who issued the plan had to respond to the letter.
Mm-hmm.
That was an institutional framework to do what we aspire to do in this little nice, beautiful, tiny course. So good luck. Maybe you can move the whole things in this direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cultural initiative and broader ISR, that is one of the goals, right, of being able to create a platform for interdisciplinary work that has a
One step at a time.
community. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? I have a question. Two questions. That was great. Loved hearing all the different pieces and stories, and I know there's so many more. For those who have been at it for a while, not just looking at you, Kapika.
I'm not really that old.
I know you're not. I'm probably like just but
Enjoy your youth, man.
building, or perhaps you. What do you see as the biggest barriers for biocultural research and curriculum that you've seen? And then, you know, what are kind of the new opportunities you're seeing now? You don't have to say but you know, that there's kind of a revamp. What's behind that revamp and what opportunities do you see? And you talked about what you're doing, but yeah. And then my next question related to it is how can people get involved besides getting, besides those opportunities up there? Is there a particular biocultural listserv or, you know, is the seminar series that for now for people to gather beyond the student biocultural club?
You know, you know, thanks for that question. I've got a first thought, the one that's been haunting me for a while. I mean, something distinct has been happening at this university for over a decade now, and really, you know, 15 years, 20 years, right? If you go back to these faculty who are no longer even here at the university who set some of this in motion, and I look at our heroes across the way. You know, the wizard Winter, and the wizard Sato, and others, and I find myself like special things are happening not just on our campus, but also at that intersection between Manoa and our community practitioners at King, or hey, or where, across the state, wherever our community finds itself. Is there a UH school of biocultural thinking, or is there a UH school of biocultural conceptions? Is there something distinctive not only happening in the state thanks to our stewards and community actors, but something distinct happening at this university in that responsibility we have as academics? I think the answer might be yes, and it's something that our own graduate students are more likely to push forward than faculty, but we're all entangled in this. For me, that's one of the active edges here of this conversation. Is there something distinctive about the kinds of ways that the Wizard Dax is articulating the biocultural with the Dax lab that's distinctive from the other biocultural labs at Colorado, at Stanford, at Columbia, at UMass Amherst with the UN Center for Excellence in Indigenous Knowledge at the University of Auckland and elsewhere, right? I think the answer might be yes. This isn't necessarily highly relevant, but maybe it's a little bit relevant. Is there something special here at this university that we have to add to colleagues who aren't here with us? They would benefit that exchange. And so I wonder in the papers that we're working on or the work that our students is doing, is there something that we could, as a biocultural hui, help coalesce? Because this is, you know, back to sort of this Cooney idea of how sciences move. Is there a biocultural paradigm that's emerged, and who's pushing that paradigm forward towards addressing the wicked problems that confront us all? So that's one possible edge. And then the for me anyway, the second answer to your question, I mean, people should be knocking at the Wizard Tict and the Wizard Dax's doors for access to their labs. There are remarkable educators at this university. Go Bows, right? Like this is an amazing world-class R1 university that's not always seen this way, both either inside the state or outside the state. And we really do have, you know, remarkable labs that are, you know, non-pareil, and making sure people know that that's happening, or, you know, Amy and Kabika's labs and so on.
And the Wizard Lab.
Grand Wizard.
Grand Wizard. Wizard Farad. Oh, we have a question online from Anne. Over the past decade, we've seen a proliferation of terms: ecosystem-based adaptation, green infrastructure, and nature-based solutions. From your perspective, what do these labels enable or constrain? This is like an easy question to end the day. Enable or constrain in practice, and how or clash with biocultural principles, especially politically and in financing? And what guidance would you give community stewards or students trying to navigate these shifts? I think the question is, to what extent can biocultural approaches kind of be synergistic with some of the other types of terms like nature-based solutions and green infrastructure?
Oh. I take a stab. I think maybe kind of to follow the conversation that was started earlier, I think biocultural approaches are transdisciplinary, right? So they're inherently bringing in those outside of academia voices and ideas and perspectives and knowledge. I think some of the alphabet lists that Anne listed off maybe a little bit less open to considering other ways of knowing. I think that's maybe advantage, or not advantage, but something different than those ones that bioculture offers, perhaps. But I think maybe.
No, I was thinking along the same lines, like nature-based solutions, and the other one, I can't remember what it was, but the Biden administration put out a whole report on nature-based solutions, and one of the examples was Kakauiwi and Heiʻia and what they're doing to restore the lo'i, and that's a biocultural solution. I mean, nature-based, yes, but based in indigenous knowledge and place-based knowledge, and so I think I don't use those terms myself because they tend to be sterile and or feel sterile and feel like they're not as inclusive of other ways of knowing as things like biocultural. So that's just my thoughts on it.
You like ecosystem services.
Ecosystem services, yeah.
But these are terms that no one in the community uses anyway.
Right.
So like, does it matter what we call them?
Well, yeah.
It does.
I have lots to say, but I'll shut up.
But maybe just to say like how else to get involved, I do want to say that. So we have a listserv. We have meetings periodically where we bring people together. We had a visioning session last semester where we brought folks together, but we are like to build up with more people beyond already. We have a bunch of faculty and students. So I guess the best way, Kelsey, would be maybe to have people sign up onto our listserv or let us know that they're interested, and we will reach out.
And if you signed in today, we had a check box if you wanted to be added.
There you go. Okay, perfect.
And we'll also add you to the ISR listserv. So it is 2 listservs. That's what we do. If you don't want to be.
But also we all teach other classes beyond the biocultural seminar as well. And I think in a response to one of the other Leah's question about how can we change things or what are the barriers, I think it's our departments, right? And our programs. And so no students don't necessarily know what to look like, what keywords and what classes to look for outside of their departments that are super relevant to them, but they just might call it something different, right? Or it might be a different framing. So I think that's both a challenge, a barrier, but an opportunity where I think the biocultural can better connect students, faculty, researchers, community, and so forth.
I just add one last thing. We're talking a lot about like this academic space, and the Biocultural Initiative Student Club might be an avenue for this, but I have a lot of students come up to me and say, I like, similar to you, like I really love this stuff. I love talking about it, but my research that I'm doing and the advisors that I have, like my research or project is not biocultural. And then like, how do I like live this and get excited and be passionate and be around these kind of people? Speaking to the community part, like I would say like, even if it's not through the student club or some of the things that we run, like just go out into the community, go to Malama Aina work days. When we said work days, that's what we meant, like Malama Aina, like go into these communities that are doing these things. When I did my research and I was able to interview a lot of kupuna, and I have like this paragraph academic definition of biocultural, and I read it and I'm like, some of this doesn't even make sense to me. When you hear all of these words, like what is this to you?
Sorry.
And most people say, oh, it just sounds like Malama Aina. Like it's just, that's it. Like all of it is biocultural, like the way that these people and communities are restoring a place socially, spiritually, culturally, all of these things, eating from the land. So even if that's just the one step that you do, even if your research isn't biocultural, just go out into the community and sign up for a work day, I would say is like a huge step.
Can everybody give our speakers a big round of applause? Advocated for the next speaker is I almost said Uncle Gary, but it's Gary Holton, not Uncle Gary from Ma'o, that was last semester. Gary Holton, who's gonna be giving a talk on the linguistics of bananas. I'm excited. And it's not just banana. But thanks for laughing, whoever that is. Feels like a Friday, doesn't it? Please get food on your way out. There's a ton of it. And again, mahalo for those who love it over from the office. Next week, we will have it 15 minutes before. So please feel free to come. Mahalo, everyone.
So we had invited, it was